Alrighty, so I want to go over this because I saw this in a couple of students' posts for week 11, and it's an understandable error based on the similarity between the method's name in the class and when you reference them when you're adding up the total. And let me walk you through it. So first, when you see something like this, know that that is what's happening is instead of or in addition to a number, you have some code, and that code, if you match it up and look in here, it actually is coming from house size points, the method. And we'll show you why in a moment. So the first thing I do when I see this is I go into application and I just clear. I often do this anyway because students will maybe have varying object key value pairs. So I'm going to come in here, and before I run this, I'm going to go to sources, and I'm going to go to main, and I'm going to hit a breakpoint right at the place that it's calling the class. Okay, and then I would come in here and just put some random data in there, and then it stops, of course, right here as soon as I hit submit. And now I'm going to step through the code. So I'm going to bring this over a little more so we can see this. Right, so now my steps over here. Right, so first thing when I step in, it calls the class, of course, and then I can see all the values. And the values called in or passed into the class look great. Okay, so, and I do that just by looking at the text beside. So then it's first name, last name, and we know that these first ones are just setting values. But on these that have the parentheses, we know these are calling methods, right? So on this first one, household points, okay, if when you call it, like when you say, okay, run this, now it's an interesting thing because notice that the method household points is actually the same thing as the number you're actually determining that point value is. So what happens is this that is right now code representing a method, once this code completes, is actually going to be stored as a value. Okay, and really what you want to do here, and I think I could have done a better job of showing this, is have this method not be as points and just maybe household, and then inside of here would have been that points value. Then it wouldn't have got confusing. So let's go ahead and step through. But in this case, what is kind of confusing is that it actually, instead of now being the method, is actually the value. So that method, that is this code, is no longer available to us in this sense, and we no longer need it because it's already run. But it's important to understand what happens in the naming. Okay, so now we're going to run house size points, and again we can see before we run it, house size points is a block of code, and we know this. Okay, house size points. Now in this case, the student actually defined a different name, which is great. Okay, so if I come in here, right, so house size points, but we have carbon house size points, which is good. Right, so we're calculating a different number, and when we come back, then we see that is still the method, the code block for, or the function. So when we do total carbon footprint now, when we call this, right, and now we're going to walk through here, carbon footprint, we're going to calculate the total. Good, and when we come back, then we see that this is actually, again, so carbon footprint total, because we use the carbon footprint total value, it overrode the function, the value overwrote the function. Now again, it'll generally work, but what will happen here is that you just want to name them differently, but watch what happens in the total. So now that let's come through and look at what happens in the total. Before I run, and notice this line is getting ready to execute, when I roll over this value right here, right, this carbon footprint, now this is representing the object that's coming out. Okay, oh, now see, this is a total. That's a total value. That's code. That's a value. Okay, and now after it executes, this will be a value. So what we see is that this house points, which is what shows up in our render and shows up in our object. So in this case, the student actually gave it a name here, but in their total, they actually were referencing the method or the code block, and that's why here that's what's showing up for in their render. And we can see it in a couple ways, but like I said, if I just select that and look at it, I can see what the this dot represents, which should be values, but this is code, which is why it gets placed into the object. So now we're going to go back. We're done with the class, so now we're back here. And if I look at CFP data, okay, oh, it's just pushing, sorry, it's actually FP object. When I do that and I come down here, the total now has all that code in addition to its values thrown into there. So that's how you would fix it. And in this case, the student was very close. They just weren't using in the class itself that correct value that they had set up for the house size. And let me just let it run so you can see this, right? And so in here, that's what happened. I hope this helps.